no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Live and taking your calls for the next 2 hours. 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. A lot of stuff going on today overseas in the markets. The Dow Jones is up about 130 points right now. We're at some key territory. We're up against some resistance from this rising wedge that we've been forming for some time. So the market is at an area where it should sell off. If it doesn't, if it somehow rallies and can close above that August 31st high, that might indicate that this downward move is over and we're headed for a new move back into the range of the highs. Maybe we'll get an impetus if the Fed comes out. You know, there's a two-day Fed meeting going on right now, and people are expecting the Federal Reserve potentially to come out and save the market with more liquidity, maybe a more positive announcement about QE3. A lot of people are talking about this Operation Twist. If you're not sure what that is, that's about the Federal Reserve basically lengthening the maturity of the government bonds that it holds, meaning buying more of the long-end bonds. The goal of that is to get long-term interest rates lower. You know, if anybody thinks that the problem with our economy is that rates aren't low enough, they're the lowest they've ever been. And, the problem is they're too low. They need to be much higher. But, the box that the Fed puts itself in, the longer the maturity of the Fed's portfolio, the harder it is to ever shrink the balance sheet once it decides it wants to do that, if it ever decides to do that, because now it owns long-term bonds, and they're much harder to get rid of than the short-term bonds, and it will be far more disruptive to the economy if the Fed tries to shrink a balance sheet that is more heavily composed of long-term government bonds. So, but again, the Fed, all they care about is the quick fix. They don't care about how much long-term damage they do. Looking at some of the other markets, gold's having a pretty good rally up today, about $22. Gold stocks, as I've been saying on this show, up about 4% on the day, topping the 1.3% rise in bullion. We mentioned Newmont Mining yesterday making a record high. I mention it because it's one of the lead stocks. It's the only gold stock in the S&P 500. I'm not making an investment recommendation. I'm just mentioning the stock as an example of what's going on. Stock's up another 6% today, over $70 a share for the first time ever. So these mining stocks are leading the way. Couple of the catalysts today. Number one, the IMF came out and lowered its earnings forecasts, or not earnings forecasts, its growth outlook for the U.S. and Europe. It's looking for the U.S. economy to grow, I think it was about 1.7, 1.8%, something like that, for the remainder of 2011 and all of 2012. Notice that the IMF's forecast is considerably less rosy than the official forecast used by the U.S. government, particularly when they're trying to determine their forecast for what the U.S. deficit is going to be. Imagine how much bigger the debt would be if Congress was using the IMF forecast, which I'm sure is a lot more accurate than the congressional forecast, although I think even the IMF is being too optimistic on what's likely to happen for the U.S. economy. But I think maybe more important today for gold is the rumors out of Europe that the Swiss are not content with how much they weakened the franc the last time around, and that they want to weaken it even more. They had targeted an exchange rate against the euro of 125, and said that they would print as many francs as they had to and buy as much euros as they had to keep the franc at that weak level. Now there are rumors, they're not substantiated, but I guess, where there's smoke, there's fire sometimes. But there are rumors now that they're not happy with that they want to drive the franc even lower, that they want to bring that down to I mean, from 120 to 125. The original was 120. That bring it down to 125. So on that, the Swiss franc is down about 1.5% today against the euro. Pretty big move down in the Swiss franc. In fact, the euro, now the euro is about unchanged today against the dollar. Was a little higher earlier this morning. European stocks were strong, despite the fact that the S&P came out and downgraded Italian government debt. I guess so that despite that downgrade, you're getting rallies in Europe. And there are more worries about Greek default. As far as I'm concerned, the sooner Greece defaults, the better. You know, the better for Greece, the better for Europe, the better for the euro. Right now, it's the fear of default that is the problem. If they actually default, I think people will start buying the euro now that you get that bad news out of the way. And in fact, I don't think it's bad news. I think letting Greece default is better than propping them up. I don't think they're going to leave the euro, though. I think if they default, they're going to default, and they're still going to be a member of the euro. I mean, after all, you know, if a state government, if California defaulted, would they have to leave the dollar? Would they have to secede from the union? I mean, certainly a state government can default, even though it's defaulting on debt denominated in U.S. dollars. You have had municipalities default. There haven't been many, but I mean, so they don't have to leave the states and leave the country or leave the dollar. So I don't think that a default means that the Greece has to leave the eurozone. Because if they left the eurozone, it's basically tantamount to default anyway. Because then they would simply redenominate their debt in drachma, which would plunge in value, and the bondholders would still take a huge loss. So, and I don't think they would default and say we're going to give people nothing. I think a restructuring where you agree to pay the bondholders something, but you don't pay them 100% on the dollar. That would be a good compromise. Anyway, a lot of other news stories out today. First of all, I want to talk again a little bit more about Ron Paul. You know, there was the straw poll, and I think I mentioned it the other day, that Ron Paul won the straw poll very handily out in California. Well, they were going to do another straw poll in Texas, and the Texas Republican Party decided to cancel that straw poll. And I think the reason they canceled it is because it was pretty obvious that Ron Paul was going to win. And therefore, they didn't want that straw poll to take place because they figured that it would be hard for the media to ignore a straw poll in the home state of the Republican frontrunner. I mean, they ignored the California straw poll completely, but it would have been too hard to ignore the straw poll in Texas. And it would have been a big story if Rick Perry lost the straw poll in his own state. And so rather than putting him through that embarrassment, the Republican Party basically called off the poll. Now, they said that they called it off due to lack of interest. How could there possibly have been a lack of interest in this straw poll? In fact, the only lack of interest might have been the lack of interest in Rick Perry and a lot of interest in Ron Paul. And so he obviously used some clout. I mean, this should be a big story. That, you know, when Michelle Bachmann wins a straw poll, it's all over the news, even though Ron Paul almost beat her. And then when Ron Paul clobbers everybody in California, nobody talks about it. And then they cancel the Texas straw poll because they think Ron Paul's going to win. In fact, you know, there's another poll that came out today. This is a national poll. It's a USA Today Gallup poll. Just came out, brand new poll. Rick Perry is still in first place. But Ron Paul is in third place with 13%. In fact, Ron Paul has as much support as Michelle Bachmann, Newt Gingrich, Rick Santorum, and John Huntsman combined. All four of those people together barely equal Ron Paul. Yet the media still continues to ignore this candidate. Anyway, don't go away. We'll be right back. We'll be taking your calls here at SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America, we're sorry. We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
Yes, Peter Schiff is back on the air. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. You know, if you want to hear some more Peter Schiff later this evening, I will be on Fox News with Greta Van Susteren. I'm on the show this evening. I think my hit is at 10:20 Eastern Time, 10:20 p.m. Eastern Time. And then if you wake up early, I am on Fox and Friends at 7:15 a.m. tomorrow morning. I think they want to talk about my congressional testimony from last week. If you haven't seen that, there are plenty of people who put YouTubes up on the Internet where you can see both the entire 2-hour testimony that I was involved in, as well as people have put together just clips from me so you can see what I was able to talk about. One interesting bit of irony, one of the things I mentioned on my testimony was the fact that, U.S. security regulations have been physically preventing me from hiring people. In fact, not only do regulations make it harder to hire people in the first place because of the complexity and the cost of the regulations, and so many regulations are specifically imposed on you as a result of hiring. And so, in most cases, regulations are a detriment. But in my case, I was actually prohibited. I actually was told, you can't hire anybody, and I was fined for hiring people, too many people. So I brought that up. Very ironic that just yesterday I finally, after about 3 years, got permission to hire. I can now hire about 50 or 60 more brokers, and I can open up a few more offices. So that's great news. I can finally start to expand and hire some people. I also got permission to publish research. I tried to launch my research department a couple of years ago, and I had to dismantle it because I couldn't get regulatory permission to publish the research. And, of course, if I can't publish it, I can't really afford to pay all the analysts to write it. I mean, we retained some, but I was going to staff up and have a lot of analysts. So those plans are now back on because I finally cleared all the regulatory hurdles and now have the blessing of the security industry to, in fact, do what I wanted to do a couple of years ago. But the whole point is that the regulatory process just slows everything down. I mean, throws monkey wrenches into it, and things that I could have done 2 or 3 years ago, I'm finally only going to be able to get around to now. And, these are just some of my personal experiences. I'm not unique. All right, and it's not just the regulations in the security industry. It's regulations all around this economy that are interfering with job creation. In fact, we had this hearing. Congress is having a hearing trying to figure out why there are no jobs. They don't need a hearing. All they need is a mirror, and then they'll know why there are no jobs. Also in politics today, I got to mention this. Linda McMahon, my opponent 2 years ago in the Republican primary for Senate here in Connecticut, made it official today. She is now a candidate for the U.S. Senate in the Republican Party for 2012. Her opponent, former Congressman Chris Shays, I think it was just announced that outgoing Senator Joseph Lieberman, whose seat is being vacated, is endorsing Chris Shays, which, as far as I'm concerned, is probably a plus for Lynn McMahon. I don't think that the Lieberman endorsement is actually something that you would covet in the Republican primary. I can't imagine Lieberman is too popular with primary Republican voters here in Connecticut. So if I were Linda, I would try to hang that endorsement around his neck like an albatross. I'm pretty sure Linda McMahon can win the primary. I mean, it's pretty much the same battle that she had last year. I'm not in it, but, of course, Rob Simmons was her main adversary, and this is the same race. I mean, she could just, bring out all the old mailers and just change the names and do the same campaign. She should be able to lock up the Republican nomination. The problem is she's going to lose in the general election. I mean, if she runs the same campaign she ran last time, I just think the baggage that she brought in 2012 hasn't been jettisoned. I think that baggage is still here. I would like to see her win the Senate seat. Certainly, Chris Murphy would be just a disaster. He's been a disaster in the House. The last thing we need is to promote him to the Senate. So I wish Linda McMahon well. Although I would like to see her run a different type of campaign. I'd like to see her be more of a real Tea Party, Ron Paul, Peter Schiff, even some of the Rick Perry rhetoric. I mean, just call a spade a spade. I remember last time that she ran, she got into a big argument because she was accused of being in favor of lowering the minimum wage. And instead of saying, you're damn right I want to lower the minimum wage, in fact, I want to get rid of the minimum wage, and here's why. The minimum wage is destroying jobs. And instead of having an ideological argument and winning it, which I think she could have done, she had to backtrack and say, oh, no, I would never want to reduce the minimum wage. I mean, I think she needs to win by grabbing these free market issues, these constitutional issues, and running with them and championing them and actually saying why a Linda McMahon senator would be different than just a run-of-the-mill senator. Because I just don't think saying, hey, I'm a job creator, I'm in the private sector, I don't think that's going to do it, especially because the more she talks about the jobs that she's created personally, the more focus she brings on those jobs. They're wrestling jobs. And that's been a problem for her, the violence and the sex and all the other negative aspects of professional wrestling. So if she just wants to focus on the fact that she's created jobs in the private sector, well, then it shines a light on the job she's created. She just needs to champion free market principles, the Constitution, just hammer the problems with the country. And yes, she can say she's not a professional politician, but she doesn't really want to focus on what she does do for a living, because I think that is a negative. It was a negative when she ran in 2010, and it's still going to be a negative in 2012. No, just changing the subject really briefly. Earlier this morning, I was listening to a former Dallas Fed Governor McTeer was on CNBC talking about a strong dollar, and this is what he said. It's almost like I almost fall off my chair when I hear these guys talking. But McTeer said that a strong dollar was good for our standard of living, but he said a weak dollar is good for getting out of an economic hole. Why is that? So did we get out of a hole by weakening our standard of living? If that's the case, I'd rather stay in the hole. Right? I mean, I'd rather have a strong standard of living in a hole than have a low standard of living up on some kind of hill. I mean, the whole thing is nonsense. It shows the insanity of these Keynesian-type guys that worship at the altar of inflation, as if somehow we can solve our problems with inflation. It's not, you don't solve your problems, right? It's just like you numb the pain with an anesthetic, but it doesn't make it go away just because you're oblivious to the pain. If a football player breaks his ankle and decides to shoot it up with some anesthetic so he can keep playing, maybe he can keep playing for a little while, but he might do permanent damage to his leg and be out for the season, or maybe have a permanent out. So it doesn't do anything to try to numb the pain. Sometimes the pain is telling you something, and it's telling you, hey, what you're doing is wrong. Stop doing it and do something else. But unfortunately, we never seem to learn those lessons. Anyway, let me see if I could grab a call. We got a guest coming up at the top of the next segment. I'll try to grab one call. Ken is on hold from Seattle, Washington. Ken, welcome to the show.
Hey, what you're doing is wrong. Stop doing it.
Ken, you got to turn down your radio.
We never see.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to Ken. Let's hold Ken off. Maybe he can call back after at the top of the next hour. I do have a guest coming up for the next segment, so we're not probably going to be. You have to call back a little later on. But anyways, so on this 2-day meeting that's going on today by the Fed, there are some people that are holding out some hope that the Fed is going to come out and say we're doing QE3. I mean, I don't know what people are waiting for. They're doing QE3. How do you think they're keeping rates so low? But for some reason, people believe that they actually have to utter the words in order to stimulate the market, even though the action is pretty obvious what they're doing. But anyway, stick around. We've got a great show coming up. We got a guest after the break, and then we'll be taking your calls at the top of the next hour. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show at schiffradio.com, the gold standard in talk radio.
The Peter Schiff Show. We now return to the Peter Schiff Show. Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. Rebel Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at schiffradio.com. Joining the program now is Pete Sepp. He is the Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, 362,000 strong. He's testified many occasions in Congress. In fact, I think he's testifying later today. Of course, he's on television, on CNN, on Fox, MSNBC. Welcome to the Peter Schiff Show, Pete.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I testified for the first time in front of Congress just last week, so I know it's old hat for you, but they finally got around to inviting me. Who knows, maybe they'll invite me back. But anyway, so are you there to testify today in Washington?
Well, actually, I'm engaged in a lobby day on Capitol Hill with allies on behalf of something called the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act. That's a bipartisan piece of legislation that's been introduced in the Senate. We're hoping to get it introduced in the House that would prevent official sources from retaliating against federal employees who blow the whistle on waste, fraud, and abuse of tax dollars. A very important bill.
Yeah, it definitely is an important bill, and make sure it applies to the security industry, too,
yeah,
to keep
absolutely.
the regulators from retaliating against brokers who blow the whistle.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, yeah, I know. I'm always, I always walk on eggshells. Although apparently, I don't pull my punches as many as some other people. But anyway, I want to talk more particularly about the National Taxpayers Union because the taxpayers. I mean, we're all taxpayers. I'm surprised you don't have even more members because we need the taxpayers to unite. Because right now we're losing in the polls to the tax takers, the people that are getting a check from government. They vote, and pretty soon they're going to outnumber the people who are actually paying the taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a whole lot of statistics that get thrown around that, well, there are 140 million households that file federal income tax returns. Only 100 million of them report any kind of federal tax due, so there are tens of millions of households that pay no taxes. Well, most households pay some kinds of taxes, but you make the right point in that there are a lot of households that get way more back from the federal government than they pay in to the U.S. Treasury, and that's something to be very concerned about because what you end up doing is creating constituencies of people who have a vested interest in the current system, and the current system is not one that is creating jobs, that is allowing small businesses to flourish, that is allowing individual middle-class Americans to invest and save for their own futures.
The ultimate irony is when you hear all the rhetoric on Capitol Hill about the rich not paying their fair share, you're talking about the people that are paying more than their fair share. And why do they have to pay more? So that the people who aren't paying anything or who are living off the public trough can have more to eat.
Well, yes, that's an interesting statistic. Many people say when they hear the fact that, well, the top 1% of earners pay almost 40% of all federal income taxes, their response is, well, that's because they earn most of the money anyway. No, that's not the case. In fact, they account for about a 20% share of all adjusted gross income. So when you do the math, you realize they are pulling twice the load relative to what they earn in federal income taxes. You throw in payroll and excise taxes, and the results are pretty much the same. The top fifth of earners in America pay an effective 25% federal tax rate. The bottom fifth, well, about 5%. So this is a very progressive tax system the way it is, and given the new tax increases that will take effect in 2013 under the President's health care reform plan, those rates are going to go up even more for the wealthy, even if none of these stimulus plans take effect.
Yeah. Plus, it's not as if the wealthy are just cashing in winning lottery tickets to get their money. I mean, the wealthy are working a lot harder. They're producing. What percent of the jobs are created by the people that earn more than $250,000 a year? I'd say it's a pretty high percentage. I say they are doing more. They are pulling their fair share simply by working, by producing the goods and services that we all consume, by creating all the jobs that we rely on. That's doing their fair share. Paying taxes is not nearly as important as all the other stuff they do for the economy. And if we tax them too much, they won't do all that good stuff anymore.
Well, and one thing that both political parties seem to be able to agree on right now is that a growing economy is a Treasury's best friend. If we can get unemployment down, job creation up, GDP growth up, investment up, a lot of revenues will flow from that activity naturally. So we need to be focusing not just on this horrible discussion of, well, who is going to get gored with higher tax rates. No, we need to be focusing on how do we create a system both of taxation and regulation and an environment for the federal budget where the economy is growing and we have a more stable fiscal situation. Tax reform is the way to do it.
Yeah, but the goal of economic growth is not so the government has a more to feed on. I want economic growth so that it benefits the people that generate the wealth in the first place, not so the parasites could leach some more. But you are correct that you can't get blood from a stone, and if the parasite kills the host, then the parasite dies too. So the government does have a vested interest in keeping the economy alive. The problem is everything they're doing is killing it. What do you think about the president's new plan? Are you testifying at all? Or anybody asking your input on the president's quote unquote jobs bill?
Oh, yes, indeed. Actually, the super committee in Congress charged with finding as much as $1.5 trillion worth of deficit reduction has been soliciting ideas from us. We actually teamed up with U.S. Public Interest Research Group, a left-of-center organization, in identifying $1 trillion of spending reduction that everyone, regardless of their orientation politically, ought to be able to agree on. We're trying to show members of Congress that if we can come to agreement on $1 trillion in spending cuts, they can do it too amongst the 12 of them on that super.
Now, is this $1 trillion mean $100 billion a year for 10 years? Or are you talking about $1 trillion a year?
No, we're talking about $1 trillion over 10 years, which is a pretty modest goal when you think about it, considering the federal government's close to spending $4 trillion a year.
And what I think I would like you to do, don't play this game with the government. Don't try to turn $100 billion in cuts into $1 trillion by talking about what they save over 10 years. Why don't you say, oh, it's $100 trillion. We're going to save it over 100 years. I mean, what difference does it make how much the government's going to save 10 years from now or 100 years from now? We need to talk about how much we save right now, this year. So I would talk about $100 billion in savings. Don't buy into the government propaganda of trying to beef it up and pretend it's $1 trillion when it's only $100 billion.
Well, and that has been a problem. It's one way that they make these numbers sound so large and so significant when what we're really asking for is something pretty modest here. $100 billion out of $4 trillion is 2.5%. I don't think it's much to ask our government to learn how to live on about 97.5% of the spending it has now.
But my problem is, I would argue with you, it's too little to ask for. It's not going to be enough. It's like the boat is sinking, and you're talking about taking a teaspoon and taking some of the water out of the boat. We need buckets and buckets. It doesn't matter if we have a teaspoon less water in the boat. So I think as long as you're going to go to Washington, demand real cuts. Don't fight for something trivial. Fight for something meaningful. So even if you lose, you lost for something that might have helped. Don't risk it all on trivial cuts.
Well, I have to agree with that, and I think that some of our other plans for things like comprehensive entitlement reform would really get into the savings that we need to put this country on a sounder fiscal footing. And that's going to take some very serious consideration of the structures of the programs themselves. They are ultimately unsustainable for a society that is aging, a society that is not permitted to save as much as it could due to tax policies. All of those things factor into it, and we're going to have to learn that lesson much more quickly than a lot of people think.
Yeah, meanwhile, all the government stimulus is designed to do is prevent us from saving. The minute we try to save, they try to stimulate us into spending instead, because what Congress is not looking for is real economic growth. They're just looking for some more phony growth just so they can potentially get reelected one more time. They don't seem to care how much damage to the economy their policies do.
Yeah, I still fail to understand that. We see this from many mainstream economists and business media sources saying we've got to get America spending again. It's a danger sign that people are paying down their credit card debts. I don't think that's the case at all. It's a good
how anybody could say the U.S. economy suffers from a lack of spending, that the problem is Americans don't spend enough. I mean, we've got the gold medal of spending. We spend everybody else under the table. We spend whether we have the money or not. I mean, we're loaded up with debt. So the problem is we spent too much. There was the old saying, "Stop till you drop." We actually did it.
Yes, and now the drop is going to be very hard to get back out of.
Yeah, and the policies that they're pursuing are very counterproductive. We're going to have a break soon. What I want to talk to you about too is this idea of whether or not we are an overtaxed or an undertaxed nation. Because when I testified before Congress, I think it was some of the Democrats that were in the committee were asking their one witness if we were a low tax or a high tax nation. And their witness basically said we were a low tax nation, which I disagree with. But then it acted like that was a problem. That a high tax nation is good. And so since we're a low tax nation, there's plenty of room to raise taxes because we want to be a high tax nation. And from my perspective, the lower the better. I mean, who wants to strive to be a high tax nation? I mean, shouldn't our goal to be a low tax nation, have taxes as low as possible?
Yeah, of course there are higher tax nations than ours. They find themselves in worse trouble, and some of the high tax nations are learning that lesson and reversing their policies. Sweden, for example, has gotten rid of its death tax. Why in the world do we still have one?
Well, the reason that they got rid of it is they experienced the problems, and they've done a lot more in free market reforms. I mean, the top earners in Sweden now are paying a lower tax than in America. I think they also got rid of their capital gains tax. It's zero.
They've done a lot in those areas, and those are the work, actually, of taxpayer associations across the world. We're part of an entire alliance of those, and there's a very effective one in Sweden.
Yeah, but also, too, I think that they should look at is historically, because there were periods of time in American history where there were no income taxes at all, where there were no payroll taxes at all, where we had very little government, and we did much better. The economic growth was far faster in the 19th century before any of these taxes were ever enacted than in the 20th century, and in particular in the second half of the 20th century, or now the beginning of the 21st century. You can almost draw a line. The more taxes and more government spending we have, the slower the economy improves.
Yeah, and we can see that policy in all kinds of manifestations at the state level as well. Excellent studies done by American Legislative Exchange Council showing how people are voting with their feet. They're tending to move south and west right up until they hit the west coast with California, which is a basket case. But they're going to states that have no or low income taxes especially, and low tax burdens overall of all kinds.
Yeah, in fact, Governor Perry is running, and he's running. One of the platforms is look how well Texas is doing. Well, it's no accident that Texas is doing well. They don't have a state income tax.
That's
right.
Think
about the massive advantage that businesses have in Texas simply because they don't have to deal with the bureaucracy of a state income tax.
Yeah, and very strict budgeting policies too.
Now, just imagine too how much better the entire country would be if nobody had to deal with an income tax, state or federal. What if businesses could concentrate on making money instead of trying to figure out how to minimize taxes and spending so much money keeping track of what they earn so they can report to the government and give the government their cut? What if they could just focus on running their businesses, producing profits, providing goods and services, and creating jobs? Imagine how much more prosperous the nation would be.
Yeah, we don't even have to imagine. Americans spend 7.6 billion hours a year, that's the official estimate, just complying with the federal income tax system. A lot of that burden is borne by small businesses. The deadweight loss on the economy from that time burden alone is over $200 billion, and there are many, many other losses associated with paperwork and compliance burdens from the current system.
Not to mention just the frustration. You know, there are a lot of businessmen that basically retire because they can't deal with it anymore. You get to a point where you've earned enough money, and if the government takes all the fun out of business, hey, maybe you just retire and play golf and go fishing.
Yeah.
Anyway, hey, I just found out that you can't stay around for the second segment, that you've got to rush. So I really appreciate your coming on the show, particularly later because we had some technical problems earlier today, so we had to bump the whole interview in the show back. But thanks for coming on. Love to have you on again. Keep up the good work. Everybody else, stick around. We've got plenty more more show ahead on the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
No one really gives a good damn. You try hard and you die hard. No one
The
gives a
Peter
good
Schiff
damn.
Show.
There's a dime for Jimmy
Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. You know, I want to talk a little about the post office, which is in the news again today for its basic bankruptcy and what the government is trying to do to save it. Of course, what they should do is legalize competition with it and let the free market reform or obliterate the post office. But the post office is another example of government failure, and yet the government, wants to take over health care, and they can't even deliver the mail. The post office is insolvent. It's probably going to have to get bailed out again, particularly when people start using these forever stamps that they've been buying, and the post office has to deliver mail for free because they've already spent the money. But, one of the problems with the post office is they're going to raise the price of the stamp a little bit, but legally they're not allowed to raise the price faster than the CPI or the rate of inflation. But the problem is, since the government is lying about inflation, the cost of delivering the mail as a result of inflation is rising a lot faster than the official estimate, so that hurts the post office. But they are going to have a increase in the postal rate, at least a couple of cents, I guess. But more importantly, they are going to reduce the service. I guess they're going to stop Saturday mail delivery. Now, I mentioned on this show at some point that years ago, not only did the post office deliver the mail on Saturday, but they had two deliveries every day. They had the morning mail and they had the afternoon mail. So they already cut back on that. So the way the post office operates is, over time, it constantly diminishes the quality of its service. Now, what free market, what private sector company does that, where the quality of the service continuously declines over time? See, normally it's the other way around. The quality of the service improves. That's what you get under the free market. But under a government-run monopoly, you get a constant deterioration in service. One of the reasons that the post office is losing money is because fewer people are mailing letters. After all, why should they? They can pay their bills online. They can send emails. So obviously, we don't need as big a post office. But one of the reasons that they're doing this Obama plan is to make it so the post office doesn't have to lay anybody off. Well, but why? If we don't need as many postal employees, why don't we lay some of them off? I mean, if we're going to give up Saturday delivery, what are all those postal employees that we're not firing going to be doing? I mean, if they used to deliver on Saturday, if we're going to cut back on Saturday delivery, maybe we could lay off some of the postmen who used to deliver the mail on Saturday. Instead, we're going to still have the same workforce and just let them do less work? That doesn't make any sense. I think also what they're doing is they're basically going to let the post office raid the retirement fund of the postal workers to make up the shortfall. In other words, we're going to have a bigger hole in that retirement fund, which means a bigger federal bailout of the postal retiree system when the time comes to start pensioning off all these workers. But what we really need is a much smaller, much more efficient post office. But the government's not going to let that happen. The government's going to keep this bloated monstrosity afloat on taxpayer money, and it's going to continue to deliver a lower quality of service at a higher and higher price until ultimately we pay an even bigger price in the form of more federal tax dollars funneled towards the post office, so it can continue to overpay postal workers whose labor would be better served someplace else. We don't need all these postal workers. Let them do something productive. Instead, the government is going to force the rest of us to support these non-productive jobs. And so while the government ends up saving postal workers' jobs that we don't need, obviously, they end up destroying other jobs that we do need in order to preserve the jobs that the government thinks we need. Anyway, it's all a bunch of nonsense, and only in America, folks. But hey, I want to go and take your calls. We got some people on hold. 855-4SHIF, 855-4SHIF. We'll be back at the top of the next hour. Take more calls. We got more of the Peter Schiff Show coming up, so stick around.
Cops putting out line of chalk around your system and written. Got so much balls they call me prisoner. Who going crazy?
The Peter Schiff Show.
Getting like pocket depressed with more saliva. So calling all the mourners and flower bringers. I don't smoke crack, I smoke singers. No more gimmicks. First boost your vocab limit, then try to ride a line and shine with it. Cause even as a baby, I used to cipher magnificent rhymes.
Make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4SHIF. That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Taking calls 855-4SHIF if you want to be part of the program to call. We got plenty of open lines for anyone who wants to call 855-4SHIF. The show is live, and so anybody listening can call in. Anyway, watching the markets again, so we're still seeing a lot of strength in the precious metals market. The gold stocks continue to make new highs on the day. In fact, outpacing the move up in the metal itself. In fact, I think the gold stocks are now on the highs of the day, even though the gold is, let's say, at least maybe $5, $7 off its highs. So the gold stocks continue to outperform, as I have been forecasting for the last several weeks on this program. Meanwhile, let me go to the phones. Waiting on hold from Seattle, Washington, is Ken. Ken, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Hey, Peter. Honored to speak with you. Thanks for taking the call. Sorry
Thanks for calling.
about the glitch earlier.
Sure.
So and thanks for posting the Global Leadership Forum. That was great. That was really good stuff.
Yeah, that was an interesting debate. And I forgot, too, after this call, I'm going to go back. I forgot that I was talking about the post office. I don't think I was finished my post office talk or not. But anyway, yeah, but that's a great debate I had with Jeremy Siegel. If you haven't seen it, it's up on my YouTube channel. You can check it out. It's about a year old, but the reason it took me so long to post it is I finally got it from them. I had asked them for it, way back when, but they finally got around to sending it to me.
And I was wondering, oftentimes the Fed claims that they're a profit center for the U.S. taxpayer and that the investments that they make, they return to the U.S. Treasury as a profit. And I remember reading, I think it's the New York Times, that they had returned $47 billion to the U.S. taxpayer. They claimed based on the MBSs they had purchased, and they say that these are audited financial statements. And I was curious how they're maneuvering through this to say that they're returning a profit for the U.S. taxpayer.
Well, look, I mean, the politicians are going to say whatever they want. I mean, it's all a bunch of propaganda. I mean, nothing the government does is profitable. They don't generate profits. They're costs. They're draining wealth from society. But they like to pretend. I mean, they like to characterize government spending as investment. We're investing in education. We're investing in infrastructure. We're investing in health care. We're investing in the environment. I mean, because the word invest has a more positive connotation than spend. But when the government spends, it's not an investment. It's what the private sector makes investments. The government simply take money away from the private sector that would have been invested, and they spend it. Now, can the private sector make an investment in infrastructure? Yes, it can. But the government doesn't invest in infrastructure because when it puts in infrastructure, it does not care if the benefit exceeds the cost. And investment means that you get a gain, you get a positive return, that the revenue or the benefit exceeds the cost. But when the government builds a bridge, usually the cost of the bridge exceeds any of the economic benefit derived from the bridge. Now, there might be some benefit that we derive, but it's going to be below the cost. And so that, by definition, isn't an investment.
Well, I guess if say, the U.S. government purchased stock in Google in 2003 or whenever they went public, and then they sold it and dumped it in the U.S. Treasury, and they didn't print money to do it, it would almost be a legitimate profit. But what I don't understand about this is that they're saying that they bought mortgage-backed securities, which clearly are not going up in value. They're going down. I mean,
well, if they bought shares of Google and sold them at a profit, again, that would be an investment. It'd be a speculation. I mean, maybe if they got in on the ground floor and they put some venture capital money into Google and then eventually cashed out, you could say they were invested. But if they simply go into the market and buy shares from somebody who already owns them and then turn around and sell them, they speculated on Google. And, you know, they might have speculated probably, but we don't want the federal government doing that. But the whole idea that they're trying to claim that they're making profits on these mortgages, that's just not true. They are owning these mortgages, and the only reason that, you know, we haven't seen a big collapse is because the Fed is maintaining a phony market. The Fed is keeping interest rates at zero. The Fed is propping up the housing market. The Fed is buying up these mortgages. We'll find out how much we lost on all this toxic, you know, waste that the government is holding on to once interest rates rise and prices resume their descent and people mail in their keys instead of their mortgage payments.
Right, and then and mark the market.
Yeah, they're selling, like the government is trying to sell some of its GM shares, but meanwhile, you know, the government is still holding on to a huge chunk of GM shares. They might have sold a small percentage at a profit, but look at the price of GM. I mean, since they did that IPO, you know, around 33 or something, the stock has gone pretty much straight down. It's now 22 and change. But, you know, I think the government is going to lose a fortune on these auto bailouts, as well as all the bank bailouts. Yeah, the banks paid back some of the money, but only because the government loaned them even more, or because the government made it possible for the banks to get even more levered up. But what's going to happen when all the banks that they bailed out before, when they fail again, and now the next round of bailouts is even bigger, you know? And I think the next round of bailouts are going to be there because of the last round. So it's hard to, the government can't claim they made a profit on this thing if they're ultimately going to have to put the money that they claim as a profit right back into these failed institutions.
Okay. And I was wondering if I could ask a follow-up question. I was reading a book by, I think it's Robert Whitemire, and, you know, he kind of mentioned some noteworthy books that also predicted the financial crisis, and yours was one of them. And but he kind of disagreed with the direction the economy's going. He thinks it's going to be far, far worse. So even foreign stocks are not going to be a good investment. Everyone's going to be in the same boat. And he believes the currency is evolving into an international monetary unit. And whether or not that's based on the gold standard is yet to be seen. So he kind of disagrees with the final outcome, but he mentioned your book as one of the noteworthy ones that predicted the financial crisis. I was wondering if you had...
Yeah, I mean, he co-authored a book with a few other people. It also came out from Wiley, America's Bubble Economy, so which is, you know, I had often been describing America's economy as a bubble. I don't know if they borrowed that title from me or came up with it, you know, independently. But they had a book that came out the same year as mine talking about that. But, yeah, you know, they might not understand the real dynamic behind the global economy. And, again, from my perspective, much of the world is suffering because of the cost of propping up the U.S. economy. And that when the U.S. economy is finally allowed to collapse and the countries that have been propping it up no longer have to shoulder that burden, that you're actually going to see an economic boom. So I don't think the whole world is going to collapse. I think it's going to change. I think our standard of living is going to collapse, but the people who have been subsidizing that they're going to benefit. We've been living beyond our means, but that's only been possible because there's a whole group of people living beneath their means. And when they no longer have to support us with their resources, they no longer have to live beneath their means. They can now live at their means, which means a substantial increase in their standard of living. So I think there is a lot of opportunities along with the pitfalls, and you just need to figure out how to navigate around them. But there are going to be winners, not just losers. And I want to put my money where the winners are going to be, not just bury it all. I don't know if he's saying put it all in gold, which would be better than putting it all in dollars or something like that. I'm not really sure what their investment recommendations are. But anyway, hopefully that answers your question. Everybody stick around. We've got a lot more of the Peter Schiff Show coming up after the break. You're listening to Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome back. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We're taking your calls at 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. I got a lot of interesting sound I want to go over regarding, this is the drum beat that we're hearing, this class warfare, this socket to the rich. They're getting away with murder. They're not paying their fair share. Of course, they're doing a lot more than paying their fair share. It's the so-called rich who are responsible for the economic growth. They're the ones that put their capital at risk. They're the ones that run the businesses, right? They're the ones that work the hard hours, making it possible. They're the ones that sign the paychecks so that they don't bounce, that make it possible for other people to have jobs. They're the ones that provide the goods and services that keep the economy growing. That's how they're paying their dues. The taxes, well, maybe that's the icing, not the cake. The cake is all the work that they're doing and to keep the economy going. And if we're just going to try to vilify them, well, maybe they just won't do that work anymore. We'll see how far the economy gets without any of the job creators. Anyway, before I do, though, I want to just take a quick phone call. Dave's calling from Las Vegas. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, Peter. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. So I just got in a very lengthy conversation with a friend of mine because I'm coming into some money that I would like to put away for retirement. And I said that I was actually kind of interested in maybe putting as much as 50% of my retirement into gold. And he said that would actually be pretty crazy, and said that really anything in the neighborhood of like 15% is probably the max point. What would you recommend as far as what percentage to have in gold right now? Yeah,
it varies from people to people. I mean, I would generally agree that half of your assets in physical gold would be heavier than I would suggest in general for people to have. Personally, I don't have nearly that much of my own money in physical precious metals. I have a lot of my money in mining stocks, probably a much bigger percentage than maybe any of my clients. I've just been very, very big on gold stocks for a number of years. So I would look at mining stocks as another way to have exposure to bullion rather than just putting it all in the physical. But, I think you should also have other investments. I think you should look at investing in equities in some of the emerging market economies where I think you have a lot of potential for growth. So you're not making such a big bet on gold, even though I think it's a winning bet. The question is, we also have to plan on, what if we're wrong? What if it's not a winning bet? So I think you don't need to make such an all or nothing bet on gold. If we're right, gold goes up a lot, and I think you'll make plenty of money on the portion that you have in gold and gold stocks. And if we're wrong, you don't want to have that big a bet and miss out on other opportunities that might emerge. But anyway, if you really want to have a more intimate, detailed discussion, because I can't really give investment advice on this platform, that's the security regulators won't let me. But you can certainly call up my brokerage firm, Euro Pacific Capital. You can talk to a broker And they would be happy to, specifically get into some of the advice that I would give to you, given the circumstances that you're in. So I look forward to having you as a client.
Thanks, Peter.
Anyway, hey, thanks for the call. So let me play some of the sound clips I've got. First, I got some from Chris Matthews, again, about the rich, right? We got to make the rich pay their fair share. They've been getting away with murder, those rich, right? Anyway, here it is, cut number one.
Two Democrats that I respect. There's the president and Chuck Schumer, both saying we're not doing this out of resentment. We're not doing it out of class warfare. It just must be done because somebody has to pay the load. And the rich, Willie Sutton, you go where the money is. They got the money. They got to pay their share.
Yeah, it makes sense that he brought up Willie Sutton because, of course, Willie Sutton was a bank robber. And so if the government's going to rob people, they want to rob the people that have the most money. Forget about the fact that they're already paying a disproportionately large share, shouldering a disproportionately large share of the burden already. And, of course, it's not going to grow the economy to deprive the entrepreneurs, the businessmen, of the capital needed to grow it. I mean, this is not about economic growth. It is about theft. It is about stealing. He's got half of it, right? Anyway, play the rest of Chris Matthews, cut number two.
It seems to me that a lot of people who make millions, not just CEOs who make a lot of money, but a lot of people make money off money. And they're the ones that pay the lowest taxes. Right. The male or female worker out there sweating their butt off pays a higher rate than the person sitting at home clipping coupons, as we say. Right. And that's what the president says is unfair. Why does somebody pay 35 and somebody else pay 15? He's saying make that 15 get jacked up to 35.
Yeah, it is unfair. There's one thing I would agree with, but the reason that the working man, and I'm saying the blue-collar working man collecting a paycheck, it's not as if the rich don't work. Sometimes they work very hard. That's how come they're rich. But the reason that blue-collar workers are paying so much in taxes is because of the programs that Chris Matthews supports. It's the payroll tax. It's the Social Security taxes that are clobbering the blue-collar worker. And, yes, I've long said that I don't think wages should be taxable as income because it's not a gain, it's an exchange. I would like to eliminate the income tax completely. That is fair. Rather than saying, we want to make sure that the rich pay as much as the poor or the middle class. How about saying, let's make the middle class and the poor pay as little as the rich, if in fact the rich are getting away with paying a little bit, right? Instead of sinking everybody, let's lift everybody up. If you really are worried about how much taxes working class blue collar workers are paying, then shrink the government, cut government spending so we can cut the workers a break. But just jacking up the taxes on higher income people is not going to improve the lot of the average worker. In fact, those tax increases are going to backfire, and then they're going to have to come back to the trough and look for more taxes from the very people that Chris Matthews says are already overtaxed. Well, if we raise taxes on the upper income people, we will be back and we will raise taxes again on everybody else. Anyway, this is rich. I've got the sound of a commercial that was just cut by apparently Warren Buffett's secretaries. Now, I wonder if these are really Warren Buffett's secretaries. I don't know. But check this out. It's cut number 3.
I'm Warren Buffett's secretary, and I pay a higher tax rate than my billionaire boss.
I'm Warren Buffett's secretary.
I'm Warren Buffett's secretary.
I have 3 kids, make $40,000 a year. And I contribute a greater percentage of my income than many billionaires and millionaires.
Most Americans want Congress to raise taxes on the wealthy, but the GOP refuses to do it. Why?
Call Congress and tell them. Raise taxes on millionaires and billionaires so all Americans pay their fair share.
Yeah, first of all, I don't know if those are actually Warren Buffett's secretaries, but one of them said that she makes $40,000 a year. I want to hire you. I mean, that's all Warren is paying you is $40,000 a year. I don't have any secretaries. If you're good enough for Warren Buffett, I want to hire you, and I'll pay you more than $40,000 a year. It seems to me that Warren is really underpaying his secretary. But, of course, I guess I'm going to finish commenting on this when we get back from the commercial break. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com. We'll be right back.
Schiff Show. We now Now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Rebel Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back, and this is Peter Schiff. And, I'm not sure how much Warren Buffett's real secretary makes. I'm sure it's more than the $40,000, used for that commercial. But again, this whole idea that people pay less than Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is the largest shareholder in Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway pays income taxes, 35% of its income. That's as if Warren Buffett paid the tax himself. He's paying it through his corporation. So he's still paying taxes. In fact, there was an article recently that showed that he owed Berkshire Hathaway was arguing with the IRS over about $1 billion of back taxes that the IRS claims Berkshire Hathaway owes, and Berkshire Hathaway is going through quite a legal battle to try to avoid paying those taxes that the IRS says he owes. So it's very disingenuous. On one hand, Warren Buffett says he wishes he was paying more taxes. And on the other hand, he's spending money battling with the IRS trying to lower his tax bill. I mean, what is it? Does he want to pay less taxes or does he want to pay more taxes? I mean, it seems like you can't have it both ways, although I guess Warren is turning more into a politician than a businessman. Of course, politicians always want to have it both ways. But anyway, look, I got more of this sound because it's all over the airwaves, and this is the class warfare. This is the media machine coming out there and trying to beat the drums for the Barack Obama redistribute the wealth. You remember the whole election? You remember, Joe the plumber? He just wants to spread the wealth around. Well, he's spreading it out now. He wants to really, take out the big knives and spread that wealth. The problem is, though, you end up spreading the poverty around and destroying the wealth. But here's former Secretary of the Labor Secretary Robert Reich, who I'm not sure what show he was on, but I got some sound from him. Here, cut number 4.
The big battle to come is over whether we increase taxes on the wealthy. And it's a battle that not only Americans are siding with the president on, but it's a moral battle as well. The top 1% are now taking home 20%, more than 20% of total income. The more and a larger portion than they've taken home in 90 years. And they're facing lower taxes and lower tax rates than they faced in 50 years.
That's just not true. I went over that on my website. The taxes are higher than they were 50 years ago, by far. I took the typical guy earning $250,000 a year, and I compared what he would have paid under the tax rates that existed in 1950 and what he pays today, and the 1950 counterpart, when you adjust the wages for inflation. The average guy is paying twice as much in federal taxes today as his counterpart did about 50 years ago. And, of course, that is not the best time to look, because we had just had major tax increases to fight the Second World War that were not rolled back. Why don't we look at how much Americans paid 100 years ago? They paid nothing. The rich, there was no income tax. There were no payroll taxes. There was no capital gains tax. How about comparing what Americans are paying in taxes today to what they paid back then? Why do we just have to look at the post-war era? The country didn't start in the 1950s. The country was here in the 1850s, in the 1880s, in the 1900s. The country was around, and people hardly paid any taxes. In fact, we became the richest country in the world because we didn't have taxes getting in our way. So how about returning to that? If we really want economic growth and jobs, how about the economy growing at 10% a year or more? We could have that if we get rid of all these taxes, but we can't get rid of all the taxes unless we get rid of all the spending that the taxes are paying for. Anyway, here's the Robert Rice. Apparently, this was on the Lawrence O'Donnell show. I guess he was on O'Donnell's show. Here's the second cut number 5 of Robert Reich.
And what the president is saying is Americans are on their backs. And most Americans are either jobless or afraid of losing their jobs, or their wages are going down. They can't make ends meet. And you at the top, you have got to play your part. Enough of this. And I think most Americans say, yes, that is a moral argument that I agree with.
Yes. The business owners, the entrepreneurs have got to get off their butts and finally pay their part. What about all the people that are collecting unemployment checks? Why doesn't he ask them to pay their part? What about all the people that are collecting welfare? Why don't they get off their butts? No, the people who he is accusing of getting a free ride are the people that are pulling the cart. What about the people that are riding in the cart? They're the ones getting a free ride, not the guys doing all the heavy lifting. What we want to do is we want to tell the people pulling the cart to pull it faster. We want to crack the whip and whip them even more because they're not doing their fair share. They're not giving the people riding in the wagon a good enough ride. We want to make it more exciting. We want to make it a smoother ride, so we're going to whip them even harder. You know what happens if you keep whipping those horses? They might die. They're not going to pull the load at all anymore. And then what are all the people going to do who are riding in that wagon when there's no one there to pull it? And again, here's the final clip in this series, and then we'll see if we can go back to the phones. We got a complete open line, 855-4SHIFT. We're doing the show at a later time slot than we normally do, so we're not getting all the calls that we typically get. Hopefully, we can pick up some new callers from people who are listening here on terrestrial radio rather than shiftradio.com. 855-4SHIFT, 855-4SHIFT to be part of the program. But the last crop of a sound is going to be from Schultz. I don't even know. I didn't even get a chance to hear some of these clips. So I'm not even. Is it Harry Schultz or who's the? I just got the last name, but I'm going to play it anyway. It's cut number 6.
There's no doubt Republicans have run up the national debt like drunken sailors, and President Obama finally is ready to take them on and make them pick up the tab. The president drew this line in the sand this morning. I loved it. The president let Republicans have what they wanted for the last 9 months. The Bush tax cuts, it didn't work. It hasn't created any jobs to their satisfaction. Somebody needs to pick up the bar tab. Fair enough? The president has thrown down the gauntlet. The wealthy have to pay more in this country.
Oh, my God. I can't even believe what I'm hearing. The Republicans ran up the debt like drunken sailors, and Obama's paying the bill? Is he kidding me? I mean, he's run it up. I mean, he's worse than drunken. He makes drunken sailors look sober. He makes them look responsible. I mean, nobody has run up the debt faster than Obama. No one's paying the bill. Is he kidding me? He's basically tearing up the bill, baby, and giving out free drinks so that the drunken sailors get even more drunk. He's got nothing. In fact, I think my brother's going to be calling up in the last clip to talk about some of the phony cuts in the Obama plan. I mean, this is nothing. I mean, to even insinuate this, let alone have the guts to stand up. Apparently, this is Ed Schultz on the Ed Schultz show on MSNBC. No wonder. I mean, it's pure, unadulterated propaganda. Not a word of truth was spoken by Ed Schultz. I mean, Obama is the deficit spender in chief. He is the drunk. He is the most drunk of all the drunken sailors. In fact, I don't even think it's this is giving drunken sailors a bad rap to even to compare Obama to drunken sailors. They would never behave as recklessly as the commander in chief. Anyway, here's a little bit more of this. Maybe it gets even better. Here's Ed Schultz, cut number 7.
President Obama wants the top 0.03% to start paying their fair share. You got that? The New York Times reported that only 450,000 Americans make $1 million or more each year in this country. Can't they do a little bit more? Republicans are furious. President Obama wants shared sacrifice for millionaires and billionaires.
Yeah, I mean, who are these people who he thinks are getting away with murder? I mean, the only rich people, again, I'm paying well over 40% of my income in tax, much closer to 50%. So clearly it's not me. So who are the rich people that are only paying 15% of their income in taxes? Well, I guess they are the people who are living off of interest rates. So they're the people that are buying government bonds, particularly municipal bonds. The yields on muni bonds are pretty pathetically low. But what are the rich people doing who are living off of muni bonds? They are providing money to municipalities to provide services for, the average people. Well, what is going to happen if you increase the tax that people pay on their muni bonds? well, they're not going to be willing to lend money for such a low rate to the municipalities or to the state governments because they're concerned with their after-tax yield. So one of the reasons that some of the rich people are paying a little tax is because they're only earning they're earning less money in these tax-free bonds. And if you tell them, hey, we're going to tax the hell out of these tax-free bonds, then they're not going to want to lend money at such low rates, and so the rates are going to go up. And that's going to come right back and bite the middle class and the poor right in the behind. There is no free lunch here. Now, maybe there are also some people some wealthy people who are investing for long-term capital gains. Right? Maybe people are funding some startup companies because they know that if they put a few $1 million into one of these companies and they hold it for 4 or 5 years and they cash out and they make, a bunch of money, they're only going to have to pay long-term capital gains. So maybe they're willing to put that money at risk to create those jobs because there's a big payday in it for them. But if you tell them, hey, we're not going to let you get this capital gains treatment because basically putting this alternative minimum tax on the wealthy basically obliterates the long-term capital gains. So if you tell somebody, hey, you're going to pay the exact same rate of tax, if you risk your money to create a brand new business, you're going to pay just as high a tax as if you play it safe and just buy a bond or something like that. Well, maybe we're going to have less risk taking, and therefore we're going to have less job creation, less economic growth. This is not a free lunch, right? We're not going to solve these problems by looting money from the so-called rich. The only way to solve the problems is for the government to cut spending. But it doesn't want to cut spending because it wants to pretend it can solve the problems by robbing from Peter to pay Paul. Anyway, don't go away. We got another segment coming up. Andy Schiff is calling up. Going to talk about the Obama plan. So stick around.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Well, now all of a sudden we got a full bar of phone calls, so I guess there are some people listening after all at this hour. Anyway, let's take some calls. First up is Eric calling from Hillsdale, Michigan. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, Pete, can you hear me okay?
I can't. Hey, are you listening on the Internet or on a radio station?
On the Internet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I had a question about J.P. Morgan and I've read somewhere that they're facing legal liability for manipulating the silver market, and that they had a massive short position in it. And I was curious as to what you thought and whether those stories are true or what's going on there.
Well, I think there was some actual investigation on J.P. Morgan, but it wasn't for as big a conspiratorial manipulation as some would like to believe, like somehow they're actively suppressing the market. I think there was something regarding some of the trading activity, but there have always been rumors that, you have these banks like J.P. Morgan short all the silver, and so they're constantly doing things to get the price to go down because they're short. If they are short, obviously, they would want the price to go down, but it seems to me that it's an awfully stupid thing to be shorting silver, that ultimately, if they have a big short position, they're going to lose a lot of money in that short position. And, by keeping the price suppressed, that ultimately helps the price of silver because it discourages the mining of silver. And so ultimately you have an even greater supply and demand imbalance. And since they have to buy back their shorts eventually, the longer they can suppress the price artificially, if in fact they can do it, the higher the price ultimately goes and the more money they ultimately lose on their shorts. In the meantime, to me, hey, if J.P. Morgan is helping to keep the price of silver lower than it otherwise would be, hey, that's great for my clients who are buying silver because they don't have to pay as much as they would if the price were higher, because we're still trying to buy it. I'm still encouraging people to buy gold and silver, not sell it. So we want low prices.
Well, yeah, silver stocks, they put me through college, so I was almost thinking of putting a short out on J.P. Morgan, but
yeah. Yeah, it was funny. I saw some money manager made a video kind of about me talking about how, hey, here's Peter Schiff telling people to buy gold and silver, yet he's selling it. He's got a company, Euro Pacific Precious Metals, and he's selling gold and silver. So why is he selling it if he's telling everybody else to buy it? He's obviously trying to unload his gold and silver, as if all the gold and silver that Euro Pacific Precious Metals is selling is my personal gold and silver. I wish I had that much. And, of course, if I had that much, I could just sell it. I wouldn't have to create a whole phony business to try to get individuals to buy it in small increments. Of course, when I sell gold and silver to my metals clients, it's not my gold and silver. I got to go buy it from somebody else who's dumb enough to sell it. I just make a small commission on the trade. I'm not selling that inventory.
Yeah, I know. I think in 06, everyone was saying, "Oh, yeah, why would anyone buy silver?" I purchased silver wheat and then, and I think I've shared the last of what I sold the last of what I had, and it paid off the last semester of tuition. But maybe I should have held on to it.
Probably do you more good than a college degree. Anyway, hey, thanks for calling. Thanks for listening. Next caller is Mike calling from Brooklyn, New York. Mike, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Peter? Listen, I was wondering what happened to Michael Pinto. Haven't heard from him in a while or seen any blogs on the Europac website.
Yeah, because Pinto is not working for Europac anymore. I don't know if maybe I didn't mention it on the show or not, but, Mike was working for me for about a year, just over a year. He was, kind of an economic spokesman. He went on some of the shows. He wrote some commentaries, hosted the show once in a while. But he got offered a different job, writing a newsletter, editing a newsletter, and so he decided to take that opportunity. Plus, I think he's trying to launch his own business to try to help place investors with money managers like myself. So hopefully, maybe he'll be able to send us some business in his new capacity. But yeah, he left. We wish him well, but nothing really changes at Europac. He was only with us for a year.
All right,
but he's a good guy. He's a good guy, and I wish him well.
I like hearing when he has to say it. It really means a lot. Thanks.
Yeah, well, maybe he'll be a guest on the show someday. We can have. Anyway, hey, thanks for the call. Next up is Phil calling from California. Phil, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Peter. I just had a quick question. I read a couple articles about this supposedly called Operation Twist. That could be the outcome of the FOMC meeting, where the Fed would basically sell their short-term treasuries and buy long-term treasuries.
Well, I don't think they're going to be selling their short-term treasuries. They're just probably going to be buying more long-term treasuries as their short-term treasuries mature. I don't think they're going to have to sell anything. But the only thing that's going to get twisted with Operation Twist is maybe the U.S. economy gets twisted into a pretzel. I mean, this is not going to help. Lengthening the maturity of the Fed's balance sheet only postpones the pain, because when the Fed has to shrink the balance sheet, it's not going to be that much more painful for the economy when they have to unload the longer-term debt. But in the short run, yes, I mean, what they want to do is they want to make it easier for, I guess, Americans to borrow even more money through mortgages by trying to influence the long end. I've also heard that they want to try to flatten the yield curve a little bit more so the banks don't make quite as much money borrowing from the Fed and buying and lending to the Treasury. If that flattens out a little bit, that somehow maybe they're going to force the banks to lend. But I don't think it's going to work. I think like everything the Federal Reserve does, it's going to backfire, and it simply amounts to more inflation and a lot less economic growth and job creation.
Okay. And then if that is the outcome, what kind of impact do you see that happening on the stock markets and the metals market?
Well, I think anytime the Fed creates inflation, it's bullish for the gold market. And ultimately, I think in nominal terms, it's bullish for stocks. But in real terms, it's bearish for stocks, because if the U.S. economy is worse, if Americans are poorer, that is not a positive development for the real value of U.S. stocks. But, hey, thanks for the call. Last up is Dave calling from Phoenix, Arizona. Dave, welcome to the show. You listening online or on radio?
Online. But first, I just wanted to say I thought your congressional testimony was one of your better moments. And I think it's got a chance to be your next Peter Schiff was right video, because the people I've sent it to, it seems like it resonates, even more than some of your other stuff. People who maybe wouldn't have been sympathetic to a small government argument have really responded to it. And I think one of your other callers a while back sort of suggested, if you could give Ron Paul some coaching. Right now, Ron Paul's kind of our guy in the arena, and I think he could just use some of your analogies.
Yeah, but our guy is getting better and better. He's climbing in the polls. He's solidly in the third position. So, hey, he's doing a lot better than Huntsman or Gingrich or, Bachman. So, hey, don't sell him short. But I know what you mean. There's always room for improvement. And, again, hey, if you want to see more of Peter Schiff, I am on Greta Van Susteren tonight at 10:20, and then Fox and Friends tomorrow morning at 7:15. Anyway, that's it for today. We'll be back again tomorrow for another 2 hours of the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio. Bye.